Hello, Mr. Hardy here, and in this video I would like to teach you about Act 3, Scene 6 of Macbeth by Shakespeare. So you need to be familiar with this scene. You may have read it before, you might have listened to it, watched it or studied it in class, and you're using this video as a refresher or some revision, or maybe to gain a deeper understanding of what is happening in this scene. So as per usual, I'll start by summarising what happens in this scene. We'll then explore the key characters, themes, context and quotes in a little bit more detail. And I'll leave you with a question you can answer at the end of the video, should you wish to do so. So, what happens in Act 3, Scene 6 of Macbeth? Well, Lennox, who is a Thane of Scotland, meets a Lord, who's another Thane of Scotland, to discuss the recent events that have been happening in Scotland. Now, when Shakespeare wrote this play, in the stage directions he wrote that this scene is set somewhere in Scotland. So it could be inside a castle, it could be outside, we don't know, use your imagination. And the recent events that they're discussing is in particular the murder of King Duncan, and they discuss how King Duncan's two sons, Malcolm and Dunalbain, fled Scotland afterwards. Malcolm went to England, Dunalbain to Ireland. So this puts suspicion of the deed on them. They think the regicide was a patricide, a child killing their father. And then later on, Banquo has been murdered, and his son Fleance has also escaped and has fled the scene. So if you follow the same pattern, surely then Fleance would also be guilty of committing patricide and murdering his own father. So as Lennox and the Lord discuss this, their minds sort of begin to change, and actually they suspect Macbeth is responsible for King Duncan and Banquo's death. There's a strange pattern here that when Macbeth proclaims he loves someone, that person dies. Macbeth says he loves King Duncan gets murdered. Macbeth says he loves his friend Banquo gets murdered. So actually, is Macbeth guilty? I think Lennox and the Lord think he is, because they call him a tyrant, and the noun tyrant suggests that Macbeth is a bad ruler indeed. The Lord then informs Lennox that Malcolm has gone to England to meet the English king, and Macduff is on his way to England too. And the reason that Malcolm and Macduff are going down to speak to the English king is they want the English king to raise an army to defeat Macbeth. Now bear in mind, this is a very disruptive and violent time for Scotland. They've just had King Duncan murdered. Regicide, one of the worst acts, has just been committed. And now Malcolm and Macduff are planning to commit a second regicide. Not only that, they're betraying their own country, Scotland, to one of their enemies, England. There's always been a rivalry between England and Scotland, and going to get the English king to help kill a Scottish king. There must have been a lot of internal conflict, and the idea of loyalty, who is Malcolm and Macduff being loyal to here? Surely they should be defending Macbeth as the sworn-in king, not raising an army against him. But maybe their loyalty is to Scotland and not Macbeth, so as a result it's okay for them to turn on Macbeth and raise an army and bring a war to Scotland if it ultimately liberates Scotland. They discuss what's going on, and this serves to inform the audience of what is happening off stage. So the two characters we as an audience see in this scene are Lennox and the Lord. Now what you need to know about Lennox is he was initially loyal to Macbeth. When Macbeth killed King Duncan, when Macbeth was coronated, even when Macbeth went mad at his coronation feast, his coronation party, Lennox was loyal to him, as he should be. It was a very important moral characteristic in 16th century England, which we can call the Jacobean era, and in 11th century Scotland, which we can call the Alban era. It was very important to be loyal as a man, particularly loyal to your king. However, Lennox is now suspecting his king and is calling him a tyrant. This is actually quite treasonous. You could be locked up for saying bad things about your king. However, this is how strongly Lennox feels that Macbeth is not the good man he was initially loyal to, but is actually an evil tyrant who needs overthrowing to free Scotland. Now, the Lord Lennox talks to is unnamed, so we can determine that he's not a particularly important character to analyse. He mainly serves the purpose of advancing the plot. And he does this by informing Lennox and by extension the audience of what is happening off stage. And the main events happening off stage is that Malcolm, the rightful heir to Scotland, as Duncan's eldest son, and Macduff, who is a Thane that we know is very loyal to Scotland as a country and the Scottish crown, have gone to England to talk to the English king, to raise an army to come and battle Scotland and Macbeth in order to kill Macbeth and liberate Scotland from his tyrannical rule. So there's a couple of themes I'd like to explore that are prominent in this scene. One is the theme of loyalty. We know that Lennox was originally loyal to Macbeth, but that loyalty has changed. The question it raises is this okay? In 16th century England, Jacobean era, you should be loyal to your king. And in 11th century Scotland, Alban era, you should be loyal to your king. But what if your king is tyrannical? What if your king has cursed your land like Macbeth has? Is it then okay to commit treason and turn against a king? Is it then okay to commit regicide? Would God still punish you? Is this still sacrilege? Would you still get sent to hell if you're actually doing a thing that benefits your country, even though ethically and morally it's disloyal? It's a really interesting question raised that the audience at the time and the characters in the play would have had to debate for themselves. We also have the theme of order versus chaos. When King Duncan was on the throne, naturally there was order in Scotland. Yes, there was invasions by the Norwegians and other people, but as a people, the Scottish people were generally happy. There was peace in Scotland. However, when Macbeth broke the divine right of kings, broke the great chain of being, God punished Scotland with natural chaos instead of natural order, and all sorts of strange things were happening that caused pain and suffering. So the Scottish Thanes desire for order and peace to return to Scotland, as I'm sure the Scottish people would also want as well. And they are willing to even commit a second regicide, killing Macbeth. Now, we as an audience know Macbeth took the crown in quite evil ways, but he's still been sworn in as a king, and he's taken an oath and God has witnessed it, so he's still technically King of Scotland. But they're willing to commit a second regicidal act in order to liberate their country from the tyrant's grip. Is this ethically okay? I'm sure the Jacobean audience and the 11th century Scottish characters would be debating this, and ultimately they decide that yes, it is worth being treasonous, being sacrilegious, committing a second regicide to free Scotland from Macbeth. Contextually speaking, I want to refer to loyalty again. I'm not being lazy, but I really want to drive home this point that the Jacobeans in 16th century England believed that loyalty was a very key moral quality for all humans, and particularly men. They had to be loyal to their king. And this concept of loyalty would have been true in 11th century Alba, Scotland as well. It was the most important thing you could be, loyal to the king. But what if the king was so bad? Would being disloyal to the king still be ethically questionable and morally questionable? Or would it actually be the right thing to do in God's eyes, to get rid of an evil king and restore that divine right of kings, restore the great chain of being, and then restore natural order to Scotland? What you need to know as well is there's ongoing conflict historically between Scotland and England. The Scottish and the English have been rivals throughout history, and in 11th century Scotland there were battles going on between these two countries. Actually, I believe 100 or 200 years later was the Scottish War of Independence. So what you need to know is that Shakespeare was aware of the history of the British Isles. He would have known those conflicts between Scotland and England. We know that he based Macbeth very loosely off the historical figure of Macbeth, and Banquo was also a historical figure as well. So what Shakespeare does is he uses elements of history. He's quite widely read about history, and he then sort of fictionalizes characters and accounts to serve his play, to entertain the audience. Returning to this idea of natural order, so under King Duncan, Scotland experienced natural order, but now Macbeth is ruling, and he's ruling like a tyrant. There is chaos. So the Scottish Thanes believe if they restore the rightful God-chosen, remember the divine right of kings, if they restored a rightful king, which would be Malcolm, as King Duncan's eldest son to the throne, then God will stop punishing them for breaking the divine right of kings and breaking the great chain of being, and he will restore natural order to Scotland, and Scotland would experience peace again. And this is so important to these Scottish Thanes that they're willing to commit a treasonous and sacrilegious act in committing regicide again, in order for this to happen, in order to restore peace and order to Scotland. So in an exam, when you refer to the divine right of kings, you can also refer to the great chain of beings and the natural order. They're all closely intertwined concepts. So if you mention one in an exam, it would make sense to sort of mention the other and how they all link together. Key quotes. Lennox calls Macbeth a tyrant. I want you to contrast this noun, tyrant, with the adjectives used to describe Macbeth in Act 1, Scene 2. If you remember when the soldier describes Macbeth battling and fighting the Norwegians to liberate Scotland, Macbeth is described as brave, noble, worthy. These are all really positive adjectives. Contrast this with the negative noun, tyrant. A tyrant is someone who rules a country in such a negative and oppressive way that his people suffer greatly. And this indicates that the Scottish people are really suffering under Macbeth. Later on in the play, we get some really vivid descriptions of just how bad it is living under Macbeth's rule in Scotland. The Lord says the son of Duncan, in this case the eldest son, so Malcolm, lives in the English court. That means he's gone to England, I assume on a horse, to talk to the English king to try and raise an army. We also learn that Macduff goes with him. The Lord also says Tiffer Macduff is gone to pray the Holy King upon his aid, which means Macduff has also gone to the Holy King, the King of England, to get aid, to get help in the form of an army to raise against Macbeth, dethrone him, kill him, and restore order, restore Malcolm to the throne and peace to Scotland. And Lennox describes what it's like living under Macbeth's rule in Scotland, our suffering country under a hand accursed. Imagine Macbeth stretching out his cursed hands symbolically over the map of Scotland or over the Scotland itself, and cursing the land and people with suffering, with blight, etc. So this is really the main motivation for Lennox, Macduff and Malcolm to try and get rid of Macbeth, is to restore Scotland to a peaceful, prosperous land. So, you can make notes from this video on a physical copy of the play. You can also answer this question: should Malcolm and Macduff raise an English army against Macbeth? Now, this isn't an exam-style question. This is sort of an open question to see what you think about this, and also as an opportunity for you to draw together all of the knowledge you've learnt from these videos and from studying Macbeth. Malcolm and Macduff want to restore natural order, and you can use ideas like the divine right of kings and the great chain of being in your answer. However, in order to do that, they would have to be disloyal. You can link this to the theme of loyalty. And they'll have to commit a second act of regicide, and you can link regicide to things like treason and sacrilege. And I want you to debate this point. Should Malcolm and Macduff raise an English army against Macbeth? Bearing in mind England and Scotland have a lot of rivalry, and Macbeth, even though he took the throne through evil and immoral ways, he's still a sworn-in king, and in the Jacobean era and in 11th century Alban Scotland, you should be loyal to your king. Will Malcolm and Macduff go to hell for this? Would God punish them for being treasonous and sacrilegious and committing regicide? Or will actually God reward them for restoring the divine right of kings and a great chain of being? There's a lot of questions raised here, which I'd like you to answer and debate through in your answer. So, if you found this video helpful, please give it a like. Please consider subscribing to my Mr. Hardy YouTube channel so you can get the rest of my Macbeth analytical videos. And feel free to leave a comment if you think I've missed anything important out. Well, thank you for your attention, and I'll see you on the next one.